I'll call the meeting to order. We need to adopt today's agenda.
So moved. Second?
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Also, the approval of the minutes from February 15th.
Move approval.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. I was able to read those. I don't have any questions because I wasn't here, but anything else? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Okay, well, this is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that's not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it's included on the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases or other adjudicative proceedings. Nothing this morning, Diane? Thanks for coming, as always.
Thank you. Glad to be here, as always.
We appreciate you. We can count on you as our public.
That's a good thing.
Yes, it is. All right, we're on to administrative business. The investment report, Jeff.
All right. Board of Investments met last on April 2nd. Meet again next week. You can see in your packet the printout from the end of March. Beginning of the year has been good when it comes to investment returns so far. Seems a little scary the last few days with China and bargaining and maybe not bargaining and seizing the ship and all those things. So who knows what that's going to be. But looking at the data from the end of March for that summary, the market value of teachers' retirement is actually up 17 million over the month before. So that was a pretty good month. Again, it's the last 30 days has been still good, but the last week, again, something to be a little bit concerned with. I was happy to see that there were no negative 1 month returns in this particular report. What else do I have? At our last meeting, the CFO had brought to us some suggestions for adjustments in investment policy for the CAP funds, the Consolidated Asset Plan pool for the pensions. Talked to Sean about it a little bit, and they had talked to them. Mostly they're looking at adjusting some percentages, some minimums and maximums. I think probably moving a little bit more towards some downside security. There was a lot of contention with some of the board members. Certainly there are a few that really don't like any changes. So it was a bit contentious. Sean's told me that he didn't really have any issue with any of those. Had we made any changes to the policy, and that wasn't for the actual investment minimums, maximums, it was just the policy to look at where you might consider some changes.
Did they get into specifics, Jeff, about what asset classes they might want to add to in order to drop risk?
They did, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no decisions were made. It was
Okay.
just
a
brought
discussion.
forward,
Yeah.
right? I wanted to make sure we talked to Sean and the other pension asset plans about those. Again, I don't think it's major. I think I brought them with me if you wanted to look at any of the information, but we didn't take any action. It's possible that we'll be taking action next week. But with any of those changes, it wouldn't require a movement of any assets.
Right.
It would just allow for a bigger buffer on some of them. Cash, for example.
Right.
You could have more cash without being outside the policy ranges to be able to wait for the right kind of investment instead of forcing a sell in one place and having to buy in another that might actually cost us more money than the sell, wait, and then the buy. So along those kind of lines. The last, 3 months we've been talking more about the diversified strategy, and we're getting more into that, what Joe calls the diversified strategy. And I think we're 2% into it now, and I'm sure it's making room for some more of that. Our consultants, RBK, gave a market analysis. In their view, the long-term expected growth really didn't change much from what they calculated, 2.5%. One of the things that this change had to do with would be non-U.S. equity. The assumption there is that it's going to increase. And the fixed income, they expect to increase in profitability as well in the long range. And so one of the things they were looking at was debt that's non-U.S. And so that was kind of the worry for some, was the non-U.S. debt that they would be buying. Because it's not U.S. currency, it's all kinds of different laws. So, let's see. The comparison then to our peers is that we are at a lower risk standpoint than our peers and actually have higher return than most of the peers. So as a whole, seem to be fairly diverse. And again, emerging markets and debt is what they're really kind of looking at for moving some of that. If you have other specific questions, I may actually have some documents that you could look at. Thanks.
The diversifying strategies, it looks like the benchmark for that one is the Barclays Treasury Index. So it's just a bond strategy, or do you know what's inside that?
I think it's a combination of things. I wish I could give you a better answer than that. But,
Yeah, and I've talked to Director Bill over there since that meeting a little bit, and it sounds like, based on feedback they got from the board, they're maybe backing off a little bit on the emerging markets especially, and the debt as well, but that'll all, I'm sure, be communicated, and you guys will be weighing in on that here in at your next meeting, or even the one after that. Because you didn't adopt any changes
we
so
didn't
far.
adopt any changes, no, and I know he planned on meeting two of us in Billings last week and couldn't make it, so wanted a conference call. I assume that's what it's about.
Yeah.
But since I'm here, I'll probably just go over and talk to him today.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your time on that, because I know it's a lot.
Just a bunch, but I'm learning.
It's gotta be interesting.
Yeah, it seemed, so to follow up a little bit with what Jeff was saying, Director Villa actually did meet with Dory, and I could go over those policy changes. And we spent probably an hour with Director Villa and Joe Cullen going through them. And like you said, they're really not. It's pretty benign. They're not asking to do a whole lot of different anything really. It's just adding a little bit more cushion without really changing the overall allocation. It's with the allocations within the allocation classes, basically, is what it is. So.
Is the choice to maybe have a slightly larger amount of cash, is it seasonal at all? For example, do they look at the next 4-month period and evaluate that possibly the market will be a little softer than it's been in the last quarter, and therefore decide as a result that they might want to have a slightly higher cash cushion?
Most of the cash issue has to do with the amount of money that each of the pension plans need to pay out, and they actually have probably 18 months worth there.
Okay.
And the way I understood it was just in case, to have the ability to not have to make a purchase that loses money.
Right. Or to make a sell when the market's bad.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, thank you. Your reports, Nolan. Do the financial statements and budget report.
Members of the board, I'm on page 20 here with the balance sheet, and you can kind of see a little bit of what Member Greenfield was talking about in the short-term investment pool there. These are all prepared as of March 31st, and I just actually recently prepared the April ones, but we didn't get them in time to get the packet out. I think the packet went out just before the end of the month. So this short-term investment pool, you can see it's up about. That's basically our cash, and that's basically it's up about 40 million year over year. And our total investments are up, but you can see that strategy in that short-term investment pool amount, and that's really the big difference here, or the biggest thing that jumps out on the balance sheet, unless you have any specific questions. And then some of this, just like we've talked about in the past. The Board of Investments wasn't making monthly transactions, and now they are. And I know because I prepared the April that last year at this time they hadn't made a lot of those entries. So looking at the March 31st, 2018 numbers is a little, it doesn't give you a real clear picture of what was going on at that time last year, because those numbers weren't in our accounting system, Sabres, which is where all these come out of. So like on the fund balance statement, it shows, last year that we were at negative 131 million at this time in revenue over expenses, but that's because a lot of those investment revenue hadn't been recognized in Sabres, and if you were to look at this month's numbers, that actually becomes a positive number from last year. This year we're still negative. Those are actually good numbers. Negative 73 million for this year. But last year it's kind of tough to compare to what we were doing last year, because actually last year's returns were much better than this year. So if that makes sense. Does anybody have any specific questions on the balance sheet or fund balance statement? And this is the revenue, or the investment revenue on page 22 here. So you can see, our investment appreciation, the 57 million, and it's showing last year that we had about 16 million in the negative, but that's just because that number wasn't actually input. So that significantly is, increased last year in the April 30th statements. So if that makes sense. So moving on to the M-Trust budget. So what you see here is the total phase 3 budget. We're still looking just fine. I will point out that there was about 47,000, exactly 47,000 in what we call PCRs that were basically additional project costs that just kind of minor things that we request from Alfred and Alfred Mungsgaard and Associates, and they that they were kind of outside the scope of the project, so they charge us a little bit here and there for those, and those are not in this. So really our total projected surplus would be closer to 100,000 than the 149, and I've put that in into the spreadsheet for the next month, but it didn't get into the March 31st. It was just kind of just an oversight on my part, I guess. And Tammy pointed it out recently. So really it's going to be probably closer to 100,000, but we're still have a pretty good cushion there for the project. So the operating budget now, we were looking at a pretty good surplus this year, and then with the move over to the new building, we have decided to use some of that surplus on some of the remodel costs. And I believe the figures were about $65,000 that we're gonna expense on this year's budget, or as this year's expenses, which will reduce obviously next year's expenses on that. I don't know if we're calling it a remodel project because it's not really our building, but it's just some costs to bring that project or that building up to where we can move in. And then there's about $16,500 in ITSD, like cable. They had to do a bunch of cable, moving cables around and things like that we'll expense this year. So that's why the surplus has been reduced pretty significantly from what you've seen in previous board meetings. That's the main reason. I'll tell you, the April 30th, 2019, which you don't have in front of you, that surplus is closer to 25 to 30,000. So I think we'll end the year, real close to that number. Hopefully, it's all a guessing game a little bit, and that's including those large expenses. Any questions on the budget? And there's really, the contract services is just kind of there for informational purposes, and then we didn't have any delinquent agencies, for February report. We had a couple that we're waiting on for the March report, which you won't see here because this was prepared as of early April. So, but no significant delinquent agency reports, and the requirement to have them report every month has been good. It's been a lot easier to manage who's actually delinquent. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Nolan.
Thank you.
The Personnel Committee report is next. Janice, do you want to talk about that?
Tammy and I met with Sean and Carrie. Carrie and I met with Sean and Tammy this morning at 8 and went through the agency pay plan policy and looked at the projected plan for this coming year, which those numbers are included in the budget presented to you. And Carrie and I don't believe, had no concerns. It looked right on par.
Catching people up, it was about, we were spending more than another 21,000 to where they needed to be, but that is all in the budget right now, and to get them to the pay level that we want, but we're still using the 2016 market values.
And
So that will
adjust
change
next
next
year.
year to the 2018. Any questions there? We feel good about it, so.
Yeah.
All right.
And that number is on page 45, it's in there, the proposed pay adjustments according to pay plan policy, that's that 21.5. When we get that far, it's included in the budget request for fiscal year 2020.
All right. And Nolan, we're going to have you come back for the budget committee report to kind of go through
Sure.
with Dan and Dan.
So I won't go line by line here. I'll just kind of touch on some of the bigger expenses and some of the bigger changes from last year. So at the some of the biggest changes are in our personal service expenses. So as you kind of remember, most of Tammy's time and Darla's time and all of another Jeannie's time have all been budgeted under the project for phase 3. Since we started the project, And that project is scheduled to end in December 2019, so those costs will shift back into our normal operating, and that's about 1.9 FTE that will shift into the regular operating budget from the M-Trust project. So that's why you can see the salaries, going up pretty significantly. And then, just below that is the pay plan adjustment that we talked about. And then obviously we'll see increases in health insurance and other benefits because those same health insurance and benefits were charged to the project for those positions' time. So, the end result there is about a 9% increase in personal service expenses, and then you'll see on the right there that about 7.7% of that is just because of those positions coming back into the fold, I guess, if you will. So then moving on to contracted service. Does anybody have any questions or?
Sean, did you say something that we should expect another increase in the following year's budget because it's only half a year's salary?
Yes, so, on page 45 there, where you can see the salaries jump from 1.06 million to 1.21 million. And like Nolan said, it's 80-some% of the 9.90% is actually attributed to those positions that have been captured under M-Trust. And since we're only capturing about half of the year in this budget, the following year you'll have their salaries for the whole year included. So you'll see it'll look like a big jump, but it's salaries that we've been paying all along. It's just been budgeted under the M-Trust project for tracking purposes for Legislative Finance Committee.
And will this create a red flag? I mean, they know we've been already paying these salaries.
Yeah, I mean, if I can't say that they won't
Yeah.
ask about it. I mean, I'm sure they will, but yeah, they do. I mean, and I've talked about it in they really don't look at our budget numbers very often. Sometimes they will, like during an audit committee, they'll ask, I see your personal services is doing this or your operating's doing that, and we, at that point is when I explain it. But
All right.
they could ask about it.
And the budget year is July 1, right?
Yeah, July 1 through June 30th. Yep.
And a couple years ago, in our budget justification, we actually had, I don't know if it was a reduction, but we had like a new position come on, I think, in that same budget, and we had made the decision to move these expenses over, so it almost, I think, the personal service,
It did.
it actually went down, which is, it was kind of an anomaly, and so we could, it's very easy to explain. It's just, but yeah, that's a good point. There will be another increase next year because the entire year will be budgeted for those positions. So moving on to our contracted services. Kind of, most of these are pretty standard expenses now. The valuation and they're larger expenses, but that we do those every year. The one that you'll see that we have a peer review that's every 5 years on our actuarial services. So we'll we'll hire an actuarial firm to do a review of what CAVMAC has been doing on our valuation, and we budget about $35,000 for that peer review for this upcoming year. And again, that's about once every 5 years that we see that. And then moving on, the next bigger expense, a lot of these are going to be, you can see on the side, they say fixed. If they're fixed costs, those are costs that, we basically are assigned from Department of Administration or other agencies that we really don't have a ton of say in. And once they're fixed, that's what we are charged for that year. We got our same amounts in there for legal fees and services, and then obviously our contract with Alfred Monksgaard and Associates, for the system, for the M-Trust system maintenance contract. And then we have printing and publishing is another 40,000 this year. We've only used about 10 to 15,000 so far this year, but we plan on sending out a few more newsletters next year. I think we got one in this year. And then the rest of those expenses are ITSD expenses for the they're just state expenses that we get charged by ITSD, and there's something that John and I kind of get together on, but John knows, they're based on usage and things like that. So, any questions on any of the contracted services? Supplies and materials, you'll see the large one that jumps out at you is the 110,000, and that's going to be for the remodel costs at the new location. We are charging about 65,000 of that again in this fiscal year, so it's smaller than it could be, but there is going to be some expenses for those remodel costs in the new location.
Just a general question on that, Nolan and/or Sean. Since we talked last, has anything shifted in the timing of that move-in or the cost estimates?
The only cost estimate change has been just yesterday. There's a $500 change order for the break room. They ran into a hitch in where they wanted to put the sink, and it changes it. So I mean, that's not a big deal. As far as the actual move-in date, it's going to be the last weekend in July now instead of the last weekend in June, which in some respects is actually better for us. I mean, I think we were all sort of a little bit relieved that was the case.
Yeah.
They were optimistic they could hit our deadline to move in the last weekend in June, but they couldn't give us a guarantee. And of course, we're going to, you've seen the newsletter that Darla has together. We're about to communicate to all of our membership when we're going to not be here, and we can't have that be a different day.
Right.
So I think that's actually worked out for the best. Yep.
So you don't want to put a sign on the door, just kidding?
Yeah, right. Well, I will guarantee you there's going to be all kinds of people that have been coming to this building for 20 years as retarees that are going to just be blown away, like, where are they? And so we'll have to have some kind of a sign out there telling them our new address. Even though we'll communicate it and we'll put it on our website and stuff, but yeah.
That means they actually have to read it.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And we've already updated our letterhead and removed our current physical address from our letterhead, so in pre-planning for the move, so.
Are most of your employees anticipating happily the change?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, we're going, they've seen the floor plan and they've seen what offices they'll be assigned. Hopefully now that that move-in date has been extended, we should have the opportunity to take them down there in a few shifts and show them their actual where they're at and make sure we get their desks drawn in on the plan right, so when the movers move it gets set up right and everything. But yeah, they seem excited.
So most of the stuff is coming from this building, like the desks and all
Yeah,
of
we're
those things.
trying to use all the
Good.
same furniture. The movers will take, like this table, they'll take it apart, they'll move it over there, they'll reassemble it where it goes in the new building. Yep.
Great.
And not extend it.
Yeah, hopefully not.
So hopefully all the board
That's not a
members
good
will
thing,
remember
but-
where to go in
We
August.
like being told.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it could be hard for, you've been on the board for how long?
15 years?
Yeah. You'll have a hard time not driving to this building.
I will.
Yeah.
I will.
I said I'm sure I'm gonna, I've been coming here for almost 27 years, I'm sure I'm gonna drive here on several occasions
yeah.
and have to just keep going. Yeah.
So you can see that for those supplies and materials, it obviously went up 170%, but all of that pretty much is attributable to that 110,000 that obviously we didn't budget for last year. So communications, nothing much changed from the previous, year on communications. It's a very small increase. And then our largest expense in that category is our postage and mailing. And just in case we keep it at that 80,000 if we send out some more, newsletters or handbooks.
Is the reason that there's only 33,000 expense so far, given that we're 75% through the fiscal year, because there's a lot of bills that'll still be paid in the end of the fiscal year, or are we just running that category much less expensively than we thought?
Just, we didn't send out as many, we only sent out one newsletter this year. We're going to be sending out one newsletter, and then, all of our other 1099 mailings and those things are probably included in this, and then our account, the statement of.
Yeah, the annual statements.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. The one thing, we didn't have a mass mailing of handbooks,
Right.
which is part of that cost.
Yeah.
And then, like Nolan said, we only had the one newsletter that's about to go out, and that's part of the reason why.
Do I just hit end?
No, the green
No,
button.
answer.
Oh, answer it?
Yeah. Teacher's retirement.
Good morning, this is Scott Dubs.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, Scott.
I'm sorry I was so late.
We understand. We're on to the budget committee report right now, if you want to know where we're at on administrative business.
Okay, super, thank you, and I will try to not interrupt anymore.
All right, thank you. You almost got hung up on.
Yeah, I was
Nolan
trying
just
to
gonna
ignore
hang
your
up.
call there. Scott, I thought it was someone calling in for regular business. So, all right. Well, good to have you. So I'm on page 48. We're talking about the communications and the postage and mailing. It's staying the same from last year, the $80,000, and we haven't expensed as much this year because of just some business decisions of we didn't send out as many newsletters and handbooks and stuff that we're hoping to get to next year, which will, be closer to that 80,000 level of on the postage and mailing.
Let me interrupt you just for a second. So Scott, you probably just have the electronic version of the board packet, right? I mean, we didn't get you a printed version. So your page numbers will be a little bit different than what we're saying here, because I add blank pages in the print document. So we're on the budget justification, and Nolan just wrapped up the communications piece of that. So we're about to jump into travel.
No problem.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Okay, so moving on to travel, not a lot of differences here in the in-state and out-of-state travel for employees. The board member travel, we've reduced that a little bit, and that's more just because of, we kind of realized that we were budgeting some of that travel for board members. We were including the conference costs, which actually we moved down to where they should be in the conference and training costs versus the actual official travel. I mean, the travel should really just include, the hotel, airfare, stuff like that. And then the conference fees themselves will move into a separate category that you'll see later on. But we should probably discuss the board member travel. I know we have it here for 2 board members to go to the annual conference, and then 2 board members to go to the workshop.
So we have an agenda item to do both of those here and coming up, so I would wait till then. I mean, we budgeted essentially for the same level of board travel that we did last year, and then if we decide something different, we can adjust it.
Okay. So in rent is going to be another couple of expenses that jump out at you. The new building rent is $108,000, and then the rent on, we need about 8 spaces from the city parking commission in that parking lot across the street from the new building. And so those are going to be the large expenses that we did not have last year. I will point at some point, we would rent some of this space out, and it will offset, some of that with revenue, on this building.
But currently, we're not assuming any amount for that in the budget. correct?
No, because these are just expenses,
Right.
and it doesn't account for revenue, that. But
Yeah.
on the balance sheet, it'll.
Right, it'll end up being the miscellaneous revenue on the balance sheet, like no one said, but it's not included as an expenditure. And,
Right.
you know, at the time we did this, we were still planning that we were moving on the last weekend in June, so this would have included, you know, the month of July. We'll end up paying a prorated amount for the month of July, just on the last 4 or 5 days of the month that they're still in July when we will get there. So will be slightly less than that.
Well, if you move in on the 20th, that's the 50th anniversary of the moon landing.
Is it?
Yeah.
We're gonna miss it by a week. But yeah. And then,
Yeah.
and then we do have, you know, I'll talk more about that when we get to the building update, but we do have a good lead on a lessor to come into this building, and so we will be offsetting that.
Any other questions on the rent category there? Repairs and maintenance is that whole category. Most of it has to do with you know, our software maintenance contracts, and they're pretty straightforward. You know, some of them have increased slightly, and over the years we've gotten rid of a few, and so I guess none of them are huge expenses. A lot of the bigger expenses have shifted to, you know, now they're maintenance contracts with ITSD, and then they charge us an amount kind of in those ITSD expenses that we talked about earlier. So unless there's any specific questions on those, the total category actually went down a little bit by about 11%. So then the other expenses category, this captures a lot of our dues and subscriptions, and then the education and training. You can see that that's where we moved some of those expenses from the board travel into, so you can see that increased that category a little bit. We did have a reduction in our what they call SWA cap, or the statewide cost allocation. That's a fixed cost that we get from DOA, and that, you know, has gone down pretty significantly, which is good.
Nolan, what are indirect administration costs?
So there's the Department of Administration has, you know, a finance and budget division sort of in Department of Administration, and they capture some costs, I guess, in that it's more, it actually is like the very last fixed cost that's assigned to all agencies. And you know, I'm not really sure if we just cover some of those costs because of, you know, the budgeting and financial planning that they do for the whole Department of Administration. But every division ends up paying for it a little bit, and it's just it's kind of one of those.
Nobody
We
knows where
don't,
the money goes.
we don't really know exactly
Well,
what it
yeah,
is.
they have justification for it. It's every state agency that's in the executive branch ends up paying it. It's not just Department of Ed
Yeah.
attached to it.
And they must do some work, you know, for the overall state in that little division, that
Okay.
kind of allows them to charge that. But I can look in and get a better answer for you. I mean, that really wasn't wasn't the greatest answer. And then you'll see, you know, obviously we have some moving expenses that are gonna, the moving to the new location, and it's about that's the quote is $7,650, and that's actually the moving company coming in and packing everything up and moving it over.
That seems cheap.
It does seem cheap, doesn't it? I was
Yes.
like, wow.
And then the last little category is our audit fees, and those have increased pretty significantly over the last, you know, 4 or 5 years. It's a biannual amount, and it's $106,000 for our regular financial audit and compliance audit, and then the GASB 68 audit what we're hoping is that, I thought in this biennium that they would, wrap that into their overall, fixed cost, but it sounds like they're waiting until next year to wrap the whole thing in. They've brought some of those expenses in, but not all of them, for the GASB 68 audit. So we basically have the regular financial audit on our CAFR every year, and then the GASB 68 audit every year. And so there's the two separate categories. And they've gone up. The one, I guess I should say, the financial audit has gone up pretty significantly, and the GASB 68 audit has actually come down a little bit. So I think that they're trying to wrap all that into one fixed cost at some point. So that gets us to our bottom line number. We do have an increase in our, total operating, just without personal services, of 29%, and 21.5% of that increase is really due to just the moving to the new location, the rent, the remodel costs that we talked about. So we had an increase anyways, but the main majority of that is because of the move. And then, so our total increase is about 17% to the 3.1 million.
And we're still well below that 1.5%.
Yeah, so that in fiscal year 18 shows our retirement benefits paid. So that's, the last fiscal year of 350 million, and then our admin expenses in fiscal year 18 of the 2.8. So we're at 0.80%. In fiscal year 18 we were, so even if we were to spend the 3.1 million that we're requesting, we would still be significantly below the 1.5% of benefits paid.
Are those published for peers? Or do we know what TRS or other teachers' retirement systems are in other states? Do you have any idea?
PERS has the same threshold we do. I mean, they're supposed to stay under 1.5. The thing that's, and I think that their number is available, but they're dividing their cost between the 8 systems. And so you can, I think if you look at their CAFR, you can get that number for PERS, and it's comparable.
You were asking about other states, weren't you?
Both, yeah.
Yeah, other states, you can calculate it easy enough. I don't know that they necessarily.
Just wondering if
publish it.
I have a feeling that we're doing a little better than other
I agree.
folks in terms of our expenses, but I just was curious if you'd ever looked at that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and in the next fiscal year, we won't have the moving costs, and some of the rent costs should be offset by rent from here too, so.
The
Yeah.
revenues don't show up in that number, right?
No, they
You
won't.
can't
but-
net it out. It's just yeah.
I mean, we could show it to you, but it wouldn't make sense to show it on our budget
As a
because
net
of
number.
because of the expenses, and
Yeah.
you couldn't code it into Sabres as a offset to expenses, because that would be improper. You'd want to code it as a revenue,
Yep.
rental revenue.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you guys have anything to add?
No, I think Nolan did a really good job of going through. That's all I was going to mention is everything looked right in line. The few things that looked surprising at first have great explanations, and we went through this whole discussion. And we're really pleased with how things look, and you guys are doing a great job. Good job. Yeah.
Wait, I have one more question. On the audit cost of 106,000 or so, is that a contractual relationship with the people that are doing the auditing? And if so, do you know for how many more years? And do we have an opportunity to farm that out to other people that might charge us less? It seems expensive.
We don't. By law, we have to be, so it's the legislative audit division. So by law, we have to be audited by the legislative audit division, which is a state agency.
Okay.
And so they charge
So
us
it's not
a
a
fixed
third party,
fee.
right?
And we don't have a lot of, it's another one of those fixed costs that we don't have they just kind of say, here's what
pay it.
here's what we
No option.
Yeah.
are charging your agency for the audit for this year, so.
Right.
We looked at that, I know last year too, and just looked at the total that the state is charging us across the board for everything, and it is a big number. It is a big percentage of our budget.
And the
Yeah.
only way to impact that at all is legislatively. I mean, theoretically. But that's,
Maybe a little room to negotiate down the road, but not much, right?
Eventually on this building
Yeah.
and the maintenance or rent fee we pay on this, I think we can possibly negotiate that here down the road. The 100, so that, just for context, I don't remember exactly, it was like either 84 or 88,000 was the 2-year number for audit costs this last biennium. And the only reason it just says 18,781 for 19 is because we spent most of that 80-some thousand the first year. So it is still though like a 32 or 3% increase to go from 84 to 106.
Right.
So it's significant.
a
But
little more than the cost of living.
yeah, but like,
Slightly.
but there is some level of them starting, because they are, and it says right in our agreement with them, they're building in some of the costs for the second year of this biennium that you see as that $20,000 for GASB 67 and 68. Some of that is in that 106, and so a couple years from now, I think we'll only have one audit cost number instead of the two. Right. But
Yeah, that'll encompass-
we have no means of really pushing back on that. I mean, I maybe not a wise move all the time, but I point out to the audit committee that our audit fees are going up every year, and they're aware. That's about all I can say.
And they have increased, some of their, costs, but what they do for us, in a sense, with that GASB 68, they go out to, employers. They do census data testing, and they go out to all of our employers and test, their payroll systems and stuff, and see if, what they're sending us is the proper data, and so, that's a.
Is part of that audit review process a report from them making recommendations to you or suggestions about how to change the priorities within the administrative process? Or is it just a formalized report that gets reviewed by somebody else?
So it's a compliance audit.
Yes.
And so one of the things, an example that came out of our last audit was they review our statutes, they review our practices, they'll meet with our staff and make sure that we're doing everything according to both the law and our own procedures. But one of the things that came out of the last audit was it was discovered that in our contribution rates, we were, it was all tied to that House Bill 204, the provision where we could have owed the general fund back $2.7 million because we were charging based on what we interpreted the law to mean and what the legislative intent at the time was. But the black and white letter of the law didn't say that we could be charging the state for the counties and the co-op, was it the educational co-ops, those two. So that's, they're looking at all those kinds of things, not just the actual, the accounting, the transactions. They're looking at the overarching, what are the laws that govern the system? What are we charging the right rates? Are we paying out the right amounts? Everything. And so typically we end up, I think that's the first audit recommendation we've had since I've been here.
For quite a while.
And even going back quite a ways. The TRS has a real clean audit, which is good. That's how you want it to be. But they occasionally do find things, and then they have their report is presented to the Legislative Audit Committee, and the Legislative Audit Committee, which is a committee of legislators, they have to adopt their report, and sometimes they'll ask you, what is your corrective action plan if you did have recommendations or findings, and what's the time frame for getting it fixed, and that's sort of the legislative branches, sort of their, they conduct the follow-up to make sure that the legislative audit findings are worked out and finished or concluded.
And essentially, a compliance audit recommendation essentially has the impact of a mandate eventually.
Yeah, I mean, you don't, if it's truly an audit finding, I mean, and it's, you have the option, you can either agree with their audit finding, you can disagree with their audit finding, or you can partially agree with their audit finding.
Okay.
And sometimes, there have been times, not at TRS, but there have been times at the state where, on certain issues, where the executive branch just has said, no, they don't agree, and they don't make any change, but it typically will lead to legislation that makes the change for you.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, so looking forward, in 2019, our upcoming meeting dates would be August 2nd, October 11th, and December 6th.
Is there any interest in moving that August 2nd back from a Friday to a Thursday?
I would like to do that. I was going to mention the same thing, but I don't know.
For me, when you guys make plans like this, I'm usually several months ahead. I just, in this
Okay.
week, made 5 appointments on Thursday.
Okay.
So I can't do it.
That's very close to Bloomington.
Well, actually,
It's closer.
actually,
yeah,
at this
by 1
point,
day.
I could probably move all those appointments to Friday if you really wanted to move the meeting to Thursday.
Does that help you out quite a bit, Carrie?
It does, just because of sports?
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking for you, with the boys, it would be nice to,
But it
Move
is
that.
what it is, so.
so,
Makes no difference to me.
Either.
because I have a potential conflict on the 2nd. If I can move it, I mean, I'll be here if it's not, but.
And the move is the 27th?
No.
27th and 28th, yeah, so we would be there for just a couple of days.
What's that?
Won't you not be on the board in August?
No, actually, I get to stay,
Really?
yes, because of the way it's written.
The 27th and 28th
Yeah,
is a
no, I get to
weekend.
finish my 2-year
Yeah.
term. You have to be.
Yeah, we're gonna,
appointed.
I mean, our plan is to operate as normal
So I get
through
to
Friday,
finish.
you know, other than we'll have some
Yeah.
things packed up and ready,
Yeah.
obviously, and then they'll move us over the weekend, and we'll go, you know, leave here Friday, go to work there on Monday.
Oh, okay, so the employees won't have to be
Right.
part of that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
Overtime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just what you guys want to do.
Well, I would be willing to do that if that's what is better.
So we're talking going from August 2nd back to August 1st.
I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Scott, are you there? Does August 1st work for you as
I
well?
can- Yeah, I can make that work.
Okay.
Put you guys in, but. Okay, all right, well, we'll make that change. I know October 11th is way out, but that also goes towards when our actuaries are here. So we should try to make that one work. And then December 6th is way out, so we can look at that at the next meeting as well. But if it's just on our tentative schedules, that would be good.
And December 6th, yep, I've got those down.
It's all good for me so far.
All right. Okay. It's time for some public comment. Diane, would you like to say anything about what we've discussed so far?
Well, my public comment is I'm glad you're keeping the budget in check and appreciate you catching your staff up to be more in line with the 2016 market. Glad to hear you're going to 2018. I think they do a good job of operating efficiently. And as you've heard, a lot of the costs are out of their control. So, and I watched the responses to the legislative audit. And although it created a little bit of created issues, potential issues, it worked out fine. And Sean handled that really nicely throughout. So just kudos to the staff and you for good operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Yep.
All right, so we're on to some action items.
Yep, do you want me to?
Yes,
do
please.
A little explanation. So first of all,
Yes.
let me just say on in your printed document, page 43 and 44 actually needs to go behind tab 5. I didn't notice that until we were sitting here earlier, but that legislative update can go behind tab 5. Not sure why I plugged it in there, but I did. And then as far as the interest rate credit to member accounts, by statute, each year the TRS Board sets the interest rate that our member contributions accrues during the following fiscal year. And typically what we do is we look at the STIP rate for the current fiscal year that we're in, because we're actually setting this interest rate prospectively for next year. And that information is included on page 27 and 28 of your packet. There's a
Okay,
here.
yeah.
Flip that myself. Okay, here, sorry. Okay, and so you can see on page 27, that's the actual STIP yield by month for the current fiscal year. We started the year out in July at 2.06%. It has ticked up each month until February, and then it just dropped very slightly for the month of March. And on page 28 is the average STIP yield by fiscal year. And so you can see in fiscal year 18, it was 1.48%. In fiscal year 19, year to date is 2.27%. And so looking at that, we look at that, we sort of try to figure out, well, what do we think it's going to be? Is it going to remain relatively stable, or is it going to possibly decrease or increase? So with that, I mean, my recommendation is that we set the rate for next year at 2.30%, which is just barely over the current average, but it's below the last couple months of yield on STIP.
What are we paying right now?
Right now, we're paying 1.40%.
So Dan, do you guys see that return staying over the next 6 months?
Yes. Because I don't think they're going to, Federal Reserve's not going to, I mean, it's been threatened that they're not going to drop interest rates.
Yeah.
So,
They probably won't, and
I don't see
clearly
why.
not gonna raise them at this point.
Yeah, I don't see it really doing too much in this direction, but.
Even with all the turmoil with the tariffs and such.
Well,
The risk is probably down more than it is up, actually.
Really?
money market rates dropped a little bit last month, but
Yeah, they did.
Okay. So we need an action item to set that interest rate credited to member accounts for our 2020 fiscal year at 2.30, which is an increase.
so moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Oh, thank you. Chair votes aye as well. Okay.
All right, and then your next action item is to renew the Ice Miller contract, which Ice Miller is our tax counsel. I have a short write-up under agenda item H on page 13 about Ice Miller. We've used them since 1997, and their actual contract is on pages 29 and 30. And you can see on the back, on page 30, Exhibit A, that's their hourly rate. Their rates did go up slightly. Do you remember the percentage offhand? It wasn't.
I don't.
It's not. It wasn't exorbitant or anything. It's typical, I would say.
Like $25 an hour, I want to say, on the primary attorney's hourly rate.
Which sounds like a lot until you take into consideration it's $595. So 25. It's not that high of a percentage.
Small percentage.
Right. But I mean, one other thing I'd point out about Ice Miller is we have them. We contract with them, but it's on an ad hoc or as used basis. So just because we budget $20,000 or $10,000 for Ice Miller doesn't mean we're going to spend it. We only actually pay for the time they have as billable hours to us.
And they don't require you to put the retainer up front, it's just billable, right?
Right.
Right.
We don't pay retainer. And Audra Ferguson, Audra Allen Ferguson, or Ferguson Allen is our primary attorney, so we're actually paying the lower rate and the discounted rate for the most part.
Okay. So we also need a motion to approve the renewal of Ice Miller contracted services agreement.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Okay.
All right. Okay, so the next action item is to approve the actuarial audit peer review. And actually, I just finished negotiating this contract earlier this week. And the amount has been set in the contract, and I'll pass this around so you have it, and I'll explain what it is. Actually, if anybody else really wants one. So in your packet on page 33, the one piece I told you in the write-up I did was that, we're still negotiating the contract. So the amount at the top of page 33 in your packet for the payment schedule was that it reflected what we did last time back in 2015. So the contract amount in 15 was $30,500. But we've also paid for their travel costs. We reimbursed them for the cost of their airfare and their lodging to come from Texas to Montana. So it's been essentially we do this every 5 years, so it must have been 14. No, it was 15. We do this every 5 years. So they came back and said they could do it for $35,000, which was an increase. And we came back to them and said, well, we could agree to that as long as they pay for their own travel. So it's a flat fee of $35,000 is what.
What time of the year do they normally show up?
So this is a peer review, so we have to wait for Kavanaugh McDonald to do their evaluation. And then once all the results of that are completed, then Gabriel Rover Smith will look at all the work Kavanaugh McDonald did. So it's basically an actuarial audit of our contract actuaries. So GRS is actually auditing CavMac's work to make sure and give us some assurance that the information we're getting from CavMac is reasonable and reliable.
So in October, will we have both of those?
No, so we'll get the results of the initial valuation from CavMac in October, and then in next May, at this meeting next year, is when GRS will be here to present the results of the actuarial audit to the board. And they're the same firm we used back in 15. And the $35,000 actually reflects the amount we were estimating in your budget request, so there's no change necessary there.
Okay.
Make a motion that we accept the contract for services for the peer review, Gabriel Roeder Smith.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well.
I was just going to say, if they were coming in the summer, they should be paying us.
Yeah.
Texas and Hawaii.
Yeah.
Well, if they're skiers, they should still be paying us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Out-of-state travel?
Okay, so Madam Chair, members of the board, we have a couple of different items we need to vote on here. The first one is the NCTR trustee workshop, and I have a small write-up in your packet on page 14. The trustee workshop, and you all can speak to that better than I can because most of you have been to it, I think you all come back from that, especially if more than one of you go to the conference at a time, and you say, you always report back to the board how great it is and how worthwhile it is. So this year it's at UC Berkeley. It's July 21 through the 24th. Typically, we budget for 2 board members to go, to both the summer workshop as well as the annual conference. But we have 100% flexibility there. We can send none to the annual and 4 or 5 to the summer, or we can decide to send more to both if you like. So,
Out of all the ones I've been to, the one last year in Berkeley was the best one I've ever attended. And I've never done the actual annual conference, but it was excellent. So if anyone is interested.
Yeah, the Berkeley one, and the Boston one were both very good.
I'd very much like to go. I have 34 people coming to my house for a family reunion that week.
That might be a good reason to go.
True.
I kind of like what we've done the last few years, just saying up to 4 for each of these.
Yep.
And then,
And then
whatever happens, happens. Usually it's 1 or 2, if any.
Yeah, because I was the only one that went.
Giving everybody the opportunity to make whatever they can make, I think is appropriate. So if you want to do them separately or together, I would make a motion to approve up to 4 members per trustee workshop and annual conference.
Does that impact the budget dramatically from what?
It's not dramatic. I mean, you know, like last year, we approved up to 4, and Carrie you were the only one that went to the annual conference?
No,
Or
the
summer
conference.
workshop, yeah. And Scott, I think, went to the annual conference.
So on paper, yes, but then we'll have a surplus
Yeah.
at the
Right.
end.
Yeah.
So-
And I would like to go to the annual conference. I've already told my principal I intend to do that next year.
And I'm available this year to go.
I was
So
kind of interested in that one, but I just don't know.
Yeah, I definitely.
I've
looking
never
at the
gone, and
op-
I thought this is something I'd
Yeah.
like to see.
Yeah, and that's,
The one in Nashville?
yeah, because I will have the time and not need to check with my building principal.
Yeah, right.
Do we
Does
need
it-
to
does
also talk
anyone-
about the annual conference too, or is that?
Well, I made a motion for both.
For both?
For both, yeah.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on that? I think that's a good plan, just because at the end, things change. I think I've always said I wanted to go to the annual conference, and I've never been able to attend, so.
Do that.
All right, all those in favor then indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well.
So can I
So, yes.
ask one question
Yes.
real quick? Is anyone, does the summer workshop look promising for anyone? Is anyone really considering that one? Because and I only ask because we'll have to start making some travel arrangements before too much longer.
Not here.
Okay, that's
I don't
fine.
think I can make it either.
All right.
It's unfortunate, because I went to that school.
Yeah?
Did you?
1 year, yeah.
It was really well done. I mean, the people they brought in were just fabulous.
Okay, so then the next agenda item is number 3 there, which is the P2, F2 annual conference. And the actual justification for that's on page 42. That's a current year expenditure, so that cost is already included in the fiscal year 19 budget. And that is the one where Nolan goes to the Public Pension Financial Forum Conference each year, and it's in Salt Lake, I think, this coming year. Actually, it's next year's it's next year's expense, it's in October. But it is included in the budget justification you just approved. So,
I'd make a motion to approve the
Second.
conference.
Second.
Is there a second? We have a second,
Yes.
sorry. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Okay. And here's where we have,
yeah, the one I just said you just approved. Sorry, I
Yeah.
misspoke. Yeah, so you're about to approve or maybe
Yes.
approve the budget justification. So the last one is the fiscal year 2020 TRS budget justification, which is what you just walked through with Nolan on pages 45 through 51.
I move approval of the 2020 TRS budget justification request.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor then indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Sorry, Scott, I keep cutting you off. And chair votes aye as well. It's been passed. Okay, so we have the next meeting for August 1st. We'll change that. August 1st in the TRS boardroom, which will be at the new building, hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah, well, if not, we we have problems,
Okay.
but yes.
We're ahead of schedule, but are you guys ready for a break?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a break. Let's be back in here by 10 o'clock.
Sure,
Come back to order.
sure.
We're on to our board training.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board. Today we are doing board training on our policy on privacy and security of personal information and the requirements for notification of breach of a security or data system. Security of a data system. So you have in the packet a copy of the current policy. I'm going to have you turn to the last page of the policy right now. We're going to do a little legislative history update here. You're going to see this policy again at the next board meeting just for purposes of making a technical correction to the cross-reference sections. They modified these statutes in 2015, and the statutes that underlie this policy that are cross-referenced here. They didn't make substantive changes except for one thing, which really, if you notice 501 through 504 that are cross-referenced currently, that's 4 code sections. One of them was specific to Social Security numbers. The legislative change in 2015 took out the specific provision related to Social Security numbers because Social Security numbers, of course, is a private information element defined in the statute in general, and they didn't want to give sort of undue precedence to Social Security numbers as if state agencies don't have to be concerned about all of the other data types they have. When I watched that kind of legislation during the legislative session, who knew that when they codified it, I didn't, that they were going to repeal the current code sections and put it in a new part of the code. So it's moved from 2-6 Part 5 to 2-6 Part 15. So the relevant cross-references are now 2-6, 1501 through 1503. The law has not substantively changed. The policy is still entirely in conformity and compliance with the state statutes. So as I said, this comes from not just best practices, and TRS has always had best practices of secure handling of member information, in particular Social Security numbers, etc. In fact, we've recently changed from using Social Security numbers as our internal identifier for people. We still have to gather those, but we now have randomly generated TRS identification numbers applicable to our members, and we are transitioning to using those as internal reference to members rather than their Social Security numbers. It's not accurate to say we've totally made that change. Social Security numbers still are and always will be very relevant to what we do here, so but we have made that change. So we'll quickly go through what constitutes personal information under the statute is a first name or first initial with a last name that is in combination with any one or more of the data elements that are denoted A through I on the first page of the policy. Unless that information is otherwise publicly available from a governmental source, it is private information or personal information in our hands, and we're required to protect it. So again, if it's personally identifiable, if you can attach a person's name, first name or first initial and last name with one of these data elements, then it has to be safeguarded as required under this policy. You'll note there are definitions of redact and truncation. Truncate in here, so if we redact information or truncate information from documents, and you probably recall, we talk about this when we go through the public information considerations and that sort of thing, that we can, information can be personal information, but if a form or document is otherwise public information, if we truncate or redact the confidential information, and I'm sorry, confidential information is not defined on here, but it is sort of a broader term, and when we get to talking about the third-party agent agreement, it's what's used there as well. So the primary part of the policy on page 2 of the policy, and this is just a sort of standard layout for policy and procedure on protection of confidential information, whether you're talking medical information under HIPAA or financial information under Gramm-Leach-Bliley or anything else. First of all, you have to describe for people what information you gather and for what purposes. So subpart 1 says we gather a lot of confidential, of personal information on our members to do the business that we do as TRS, and primary, in that list is social security numbers. We can't not gather social security numbers because we use them both for, ensuring that we've properly identified benefit recipients, etc. So for verification of identity purposes and for reporting of tax on payments that we make as a retirement system. So again, subsection 1 indicates what we gather personal information for. Subsection 2 says that we will use that information, gather it, maintain it, use it, and disclose it only as necessary to perform the business functions of the retirement system. Subsection 3 tells us that all TRS staff members essentially have the right to access the personal information that we have. That's not necessarily a given, and that's not a decision we come to lightly. It just is a reality of the business we do and how we do it. We're a small office, we're a small group of employees, and everybody's job duties and functions here necessitate access to our M-Trust system, the confidential information contained in that. There isn't a person here who does their job without having access to confidential information, and appropriately so. Of course, within that, in our data systems, we set access parameters. Our IT staff sets access parameters based on information people have to have access to. For example, Tammy keeps files, hard copy files as well, on our disability, the medical records on our disability applicants. Very few people have access to those. Essentially only Tammy and Sean, and then anybody else at a high enough level who has to have access to those to do their job function. So we do set access parameters for internal staff, but by and large, most people have access to a great amount of personal information. Section 4 is specific to Social Security numbers, specifies that we will gather Social Security numbers initially to establish the identity of members, benefit recipients, joint annuitants, etc., and then to report for tax purposes, distribute, benefits paid, amounts paid for tax purposes. In any other circumstance, so we have documents like our membership form where we require the full Social Security number. Again, for both reasons, because we have to verify the identity, and because in the future when we make payment, we have to again verify identity and then make sure that we're correctly reporting taxes paid. On forms where we can get by with receiving only the final 4 digits of a Social Security number, we do that. So we truncate Social Security numbers where we can, and again, that specific requirement in the underlying statutes has gone away, but that's a best practice anyway. That's not something that will change in our policy or internal practices. Subpart 5 pertains to disclosure to third-party agents, limitations on providing Social Security numbers to third-party agents. So, for example, we have a number of, and our third-party agents are our tax counsel, our actuaries, our death notice service provider, PVI. For some of those, for PVI, of course, if they have to have the name and the full Social Security number of our members in order to look for death records to notify us of deaths of members, benefit recipients, etc. In any case where a third-party agent is performing services Where they don't need the full social security number, we're not providing the full social security number. Subpart 6 says that we're going to accept as expressly allowed under this policy or required by law. We are only disclosing personal information of members based on a release of information authorization. We have a specific form 136. The members have to, I deal with that frequently because I'm frequently helping people with family law orders, and they have to do one of those to authorize their attorney to interact with us directly to receive information necessary to do a family law order. And you've never heard anybody complain about having to do that until you've talked to a lawyer. So,
Says the lawyer.
So subsection 7 is specific to redaction and truncation of social security numbers. We already talked about that. Subpart 8 refers to requirements for secure disposal of information, documents and the like that have personal information. Subsection 9 is the limitation of maintaining or using personal information on portable devices. The internal policy is information doesn't leave this office on a thumb drive, on a laptop, on a floppy disk, in any other manner except as expressly needed for a specific job function. And then there are, requirements that it be in the personal control of the person who takes it out of the office, and that it be deleted, or that when that use is when that use has been achieved. There really are very few circumstances where personal information leaves our offices with our members, for the most part, and you're all sort of aware of this. Somebody needs to access TRS systems while they're outside of the office. They can do that through the secure processes through the state systems, and that's what they will be doing. Subsection 10 is TRS contractually requires all third-party agents to whom personal information is disclosed to have an information security policy designed to safeguard personal information. Interestingly enough, I was going to print the TPA, copy it for all of you to take a look at, but it's in your packet. It's in the Gabriel Roeder Smith. So on page 39 of the board packet, if you want to turn back to that, you can see a copy of the contract terms that we bind all of our third-party agents to. So a third-party agent essentially is somebody who's going to perform work or services for TRS, which services necessitate that they have access to personal information of our members, benefit recipients, etc. So again, that includes our actuaries. Clearly it includes Gabriel Roeder Smith, because they'll have that information to evaluate Kavanaugh McDonald's functions. I would say we have 12 contractors currently bound to third-party agent agreements. Don't quote me on that number. I didn't count the contracts, but we routinely have them complete these contract terms. And these contracts expressly survive termination of the underlying agreement. So for as long as they would have our information in their own records, the terms of the third-party agent agreement survive, even after the services under the underlying agreement have been completed. Part of the requirements in the TPAA are to flow down to them, because this goes back to the conversations we've had about security issues for systems like TRS over the last few years as well, is what happens if somebody breaks into your computer system and has access to your members' personal information. We statutorily have requirements that we notify the people, that we not notify law enforcement if necessary, Then there are some, and under statute, Montana statute, we have to notify the Attorney General's office if one of our systems is breached and personal information is at jeopardy. We bind our third-party agents to the requirements for notice, immediate notice to us. We provide notice to the Attorney General's office. We determine whether notice of law enforcement for our purposes is necessary, and then we sort of flow downhill the obligation and the cost of the notice and any remedial response requirements, like do we have to pay for people to review their credit reports for a period of time if their information has been inappropriately accessed, etc. So that's kind of the confluence of our third-party agent agreements and our policies and our internal conduct, and certainly state law as well. So sort of broad picture. Anybody have any specific questions?
I have a question. I know we discussed this before, and I just can't remember if we ever came to a conclusion, but we are, I think, required to buy insurance or are sort of insured through the state for some of this, but we looked at maybe looking at some third-party insurance at some point.
Well, so that question comes up every once in a while, probably every time we go over this policy.
That's right.
It comes up, and there are a couple of things there. The state does provide cybersecurity coverage. It also has general liability and tort claims coverage that covers all state agencies. The cybersecurity coverage, the risk management provides, their division of Department of Administration, is individual incident limits of $2 million. I think we've all been to conferences lately where the suggestion is that a breach of the system is going to cost you about $15 million to address. With that being said, we have a couple of things under state law. We have sovereign immunity to some extent. We have indemnification from the state, and the state self-insures, and we have the cybersecurity coverage through risk management. There is case law in Montana that makes clear that if you have statutory protections, and within that is included limitations on liability. If you have set out in statute limitations of liability for your what could be construed as your wrongful conduct, and then you buy insurance to cover in excess of those limitations of liability, you may have just waived your statutory limitation of liability. So the recommendation frequently is you don't go out and buy. And I've posed this question to risk management on a number of occasions, and the response from them always has been the coverage they have, and it's been used a couple of times. The cybersecurity coverage that the state has had, in fact, one of them was a breach with DPHHS, has always been sufficient. The costs have always been covered, and the risk of waiving your statutory limitations is not a risk you want to take. So,
how oddly counterintuitive. And they don't want you to create a bigger pool of money that could be accessed by whatever, the criminals that are, that's interesting.
Yeah, so, that's something that we pay attention to on an ongoing basis. It's something that every plan in the country is dealing with. I would guess at some point that, the state's cybersecurity coverage limits could and likely would increase because these things are out there expensive. But at this point, the recommendation is that we rely on what they have put in place to protect us rather than go out and shop for coverage on our own. In fact, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that we could go out and shop for coverage on our own. I think we would have to do it through risk management in any case.
Right.
So.
Denise, can I have a question?
Yep.
Last meeting of the discussion, one of the things that that came out of that was that we didn't feel that there was any support for our members if there was a problem. And we talked about the possibility of visiting with the state, the risk management people, about what support their coverage would provide if member data was out there and we had to solve problems with our members, not nearly so much issues with the state itself, but just the fact that we've got thousands of members whose data is now breached and they're going to have addressed. So did we do that?
Well,
That's most of the cost, is that?
right. So again, within their $2 million, policy limits at this point, Scott, that is a large portion of what that cybersecurity coverage covers, and what I would assume the state will otherwise, through our, general liability coverage, back up, is the costs of, to the greatest extent possible, remediating the issues that would be caused for members through a data breach. And again, unfortunately, what can be done after the horse is out of the barn is pretty limited. I mean, you notify people, you tell them what they need to do to make sure that their personal information, their social security numbers, etc., are not being used for improper purposes, and then maybe you pay the cost of a periodic credit check to make, for them to be sure that nothing untoward is happening. So yes, we did talk to risk management about that, and again, there's just not, short of going out and buying additional coverage, the concerns of our members are covered by what's in place.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other questions for Denise on this?
Thank you.
It's good to know, it always is, especially because like you said, they say, it's not, what do they say? It's not if,
it's not
when.
if, it's when.
Right. Which is scary.
It is scary. Okay, so we're on to your report, Sean.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, on page 59, behind tab 5 of your packet is the Executive Director's report. And the first item is the TRS building update. And we've talked about some of these numbers in the budget request, but I laid out the one-time only costs versus the ongoing costs for the move into the Park Avenue building. And you can see we have an actual contract in place already for the moving costs, which are $7,650. We did get 2 bids. There's really 2 movers in Helena. They're big enough to do that move, and I was amazed that the 2 bids came in within $200 of each other. So there's not it's just real competitive, I guess. So we have that in place. All of the OTO construction cost over there is going to be $175,000. Like Nolan was saying earlier, we're splitting that cost between the 2 budget years. We'll spend about $65,000 this current year and $110,000 in the next fiscal year. The contractor actually charges BOI directly. BOI pays the contractor. We pay BOI. And then the cabling costs that Nolan referred to are captured there, and that's the ITSD cost of them pulling all the cable that they've certified for data. It's all the data cabling in that whole suite. It has to be ITSD that pulls it. You can't have a contractor do it for you. So with that, it looks like our one-time costs for that building, when you add all of that together, is about $199,000. And then the ongoing costs of operating over there, you have our rent or our lease agreement of $108,000. That's the annual cost for that, plus the $64.80 for the parking spots, the 8 parking spots across the road, and the city parking commission for an annual cost of $114,000 for the first couple of years. And remember, we start out at a reduced square footage rate over there of $14 a square foot, and after 2 years that goes to $18 a square foot. However, we're going to when we remodel this building, we're going to start out at $18 a square foot and keep pace with the price over there.
And after the 2 years, does that escalate based on CPI or some sort of?
No, it's right in the, it goes from 14 to 18, and then it's 3% per year.
3% per
Yeah.
year for another 8 years?
For another 18 or 16 years.
16
Yeah,
years.
that was a 19-year lease.
That gets you pretty close to retirement.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes, it does, Dan. That's a good point. No. So those are the costs associated with the Park Avenue building. Now, what we haven't, I mean, we sort of have and haven't. I wanted to have this conversation. As far as the remodel costs for the current building we're in, the board agreed or authorized us putting in the legislative request for up to $550,000 in legislative authority in House Bill 5. That has, as of yesterday, it hasn't been signed by the governor, but it will be. It's one of the governor's bills. So for all intents and purposes, that passed the legislature. So we will have the authority. Now, we have to use TRS funds to do it. So I guess what I'm sort of planning as we move forward for the remodel on this building is to set it up similar to the M-Trust project, where we look at it as its own thing. And it'll be just one of those handouts that you get along with the monthly budget and financial reports and the M-Trust report. And we'll use the 550 as the overall, like that's the total amount budgeted. I don't think the bids will come in that high because we're not gonna ask them, we're not gonna have a wheelchair lift put in because we're not gonna be here and it's not required by code. I don't see the point of spending a little over $100,000 for that lift. Does that, I guess I've been looking for a little bit of board discussion on that. Does that seem like a good way to do it?
That's
the way to do it.
If the lessee wants to do that, they can certainly,
Yep.
we can approve them to do that.
Yes, we could, but we wouldn't have to pay for
Right.
it. Yeah.
The thing is, anybody really can access either floor of this building through outside, really.
Well, you can. I mean,
Without going downstairs, correct?
Technically, I think that's how this building has gotten away with it the way it is. It is because that is handicap accessible, but you have to go in through the downstairs, right?
Yeah. You just wouldn't be able to go up and down the stairs,
Right.
but you can get to either floor by going up.
The problem is, I mean, I think the lift itself and pretty minor construction is about $100,000, but there really isn't a good place to put that in this building unless you're going to, like put it where the vault is, but then obviously below the vault, you're not going to have that office either. So it's not as, it can be done certainly, but it would be, I think it would be more than $100,000 by the time it was all said and done to put one in there.
Not very cost efficient use of proceeds.
Right. Well, and especially if we're not the ones that are, it would be different if we
Right.
decided it was a priority for us and we wanted to do it, and we were going to be here for another, 20 years or something. But when we're looking to be a landlord and even potentially, sell it outright somewhere in the next, 10 to 20 years, I don't know that we want to spend that money.
As far as the accounting for things, generally with a capital expenditure like that, that's how we do it, right? We separate it from the operating and we keep track of it that way.
Yeah, and
That makes
since
sense.
we're going to continue to maintain ownership of this building, we'll be able to do that as a capital expense. The expenses we're paying right now for the remodel or the construction over at the building we're going to be leasing that's just a straight operating expense because we don't own that asset. Right.
So it used to be that you would do a leasehold improvement if you had a long-term lease. I guess we don't account for things that way anymore.
What was that?
Well, it's called a leasehold improvement. It's a capital expenditure on something you don't own. And you amortize it over time. But you may be more of a knowing question.
Yeah, that is a normal question.
Isn't that mostly
follow
for
up
tax
on that.
purposes?
Yeah, that was-
And we're
It is.
taxed.
That's probably why we don't do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I guess what I'm hearing then is that we'll go ahead and as we move forward with the renovation of our existing space, we'll set it up and monitor it similar to how we do the M-Trust project. Yeah. As far as the construction costs.
And nothing will even occur until you've moved out of this building.
Correct, yeah. Yep. Okay, are there any other questions about either space or the costs associated with either space?
Exciting.
Okay.
It is exciting.
Yes, it is. All right, so then item B is the 2019 legislative summary. That was the page that I had to have you move from one tab to the other, but it's that legislative update is the sort of blue and teal page. We had House Bill 204 and Senate Bill 139 and House Joint Resolution 39 were the three bills that actually passed. Our University System Supplemental Contribution Bill did not pass the legislature. It got stuck in committee and stayed there. Yeah.
Hard to believe.
Right. Hard to believe. So in the write-up, I wrote sort of some kind of random thoughts that I had about the session and how I thought it went. House Bill 204, which was our housekeeping bill, was important because it did a lot of it changed a lot of language associated with beneficiaries without changing any rights of our members. But the key thing that it did was in response to that audit finding, where it trued up the contribution statute language with how we've always applied the contribution statutes, the supplemental state contribution. And at one point, even during the session, they had amended the bill to make it so that our $25 million transfer we receive each year from the general fund was going to be reduced by $2.7 million for 1 year, so that we would pay back that $2.7 million. But we were successful in getting it put back to the way it was, and it ended up passing the legislature the way we wanted it. So that was good news. Senate Bill 139 actually was signed by the governor on Wednesday, and that is the work and retiree provision, where they, under certain circumstances, 1927-32 MCA, retirees can come back and work without any reduction to their retirement benefit if the employer certifies that they've advertised the position and been unable to fill it, et cetera, et cetera. They have to have, under current law, 30 years of service credit to be eligible to do that. Under Senate Bill 139, that's been reduced to 27 years of credible service. However, they did tighten it up in some respects a little. Otherwise, so right now superintendents can work under 1927-32. 1927-32 under current law is available to all school districts. Going forward, the changes in 139 eliminate superintendents as a position that can work under this provision, so no more superintendents. And it is only available to Class 2 and Class 3 school districts. And so all of the AA school districts and the bigger Class A school districts will not be able to use this provision either.
Good.
So it was kind of we never hit a point during the session where I provided testimony as anything but in opposition, just the way the amendments worked and that. But in the end, it really sort of it was kind of a little bit of a give and take in respect to the law itself. They're loosened up the years required, but then they restricted who could use it. So, and that came about through some efforts, I guess, of the various legislators up there. So it's not terrible. It could be a lot worse, I think. And I think we can live with it just fine. They did put a sunset date on it, so it'll actually sunset in 2025. And they increased the reporting requirements instead of just reporting each legislative session to the appropriate committee. It's now right in the statute that TRS has to report to the state administration and the legislative finance interim committees prior to the legislature. So, they're going to continue to monitor it. And of course, if it really blows up and we go from having 4 people a year working under this provision to 10 or 12, I think, I'll have the opportunity to raise that as an issue to those various committees. Yeah, I actually don't think we'll see too much, but it really, the bill has always been and is supposed to be based on employer need, and that really didn't change. They still have to advertise the position and they have to certify that they couldn't fill it.
So that's the same.
That is the same.
Now it was, which districts was it available to before this change?
Before this change, all districts.
All,
can use it.
and now it's only B and C.
So some A, the smaller A, Class A districts, and then all the B and C, yes.
Okay.
Certifying meaning that they can't hire a qualified, or they just didn't like the applicants?
Well, the
Yes.
form says.
Both. I mean, I've
Like
sat on
Jeff- like Jeff
applications.
said, the form says that they have to certify that that they had no qualified applicants, or they did not receive, or they made an offer of employment and it wasn't accepted. And that has happened before, where a district last year, actually in Belgrade, they offered the position to a non-retired superintendent for Belgrade Public Schools, and he kind of strung them along for a while and then ended up declining the position. So that's how they marked it on their form.
But now it will not be available to superintendents.
That's correct. No superintendents.
Is that where it was used the most?
Not the most, but there, it was a fair amount of them. We usually have one per year at least. And we only average 4, just like 4.1 per year since that statute went into effect. So it's about 25% usage by superintendents. And there is one last one that snuck in right before the way the language was in the bill was it applies to any contracts initiated on or after when the bill became law. So of course we got the contract initiated a week before the bill became law for this next fiscal year for a superintendent that we had to approve based on both the new law and existing law. So. Okay, so that's Senate Bill 139. The next couple notes there have to do with the performance audit. So House Joint Resolution, what was it, 29 or 39? 39 by Burnett. Asks the Legislative Audit Committee to prioritize a performance audit which would focus on combining the administration of TRS and the administration of Impera, and whether or not there's any cost savings involved with that, and the auditors would, I guess, present that to the Legislative Audit Committee, which then they would determine whether or not they want to pursue legislation to do something like that. Now, that obviously would require all kinds of legislative changes to make that happen. If they decided to do that, we would be opposed to that, and I'm sure a lot of our membership would as well. But at this point, the joint resolution on its own really doesn't do anything. It just asks the Legislative Audit Committee to prioritize that as a topic for a performance audit. So we will work with the Legislative Audit Committee and see if we can keep it at where it's at. But if not, then we'll be dealing with that performance audit during the interim. And then the final note I have there is House Bill 715 was it's more of a budget bill, a state budget bill, where it includes lots of different appropriations and transfers. But there are in a couple different places within that bill, specifically calls out for long-term stability and stress testing of pension systems. So it's instructions to the legislative fiscal division primarily from the legislature, but we will definitely be involved in that. And we're going to want to be involved in that to make sure that the right information is shared with the legislature. And I think I even wrote it in here. The point I'd like to make is, this could end up costing us a little bit of money with our actuary, but I think it'll be money well spent. I mean, if they're starting to really want to look hard at hybrid plans or cash balance plans, we're going to need to be able to cost that out and tell them, if you decide to go that way, this is really what it costs, and not, just be speaking. We can't just speak in generalities, I don't think. So. Okay, is there any questions about the legislative session?
This might not have been a bill. Was there a bill that required us to stress test with different interest or different rates of return?
There was one.
That didn't pass.
Right,
Okay.
that was Senate Joint Resolution 39. Or no, 29, excuse me. It was 29, the other one was 39. It ended up passing the Senate, and it ended up failing on third reading in the House.
Okay.
Now, with that though, the actuaries have to comply with the new actuarial standard 51, which requires some stress testing. So we'll be looking at some of that anyway when we get the results of the valuation in October. And we probably will talk about that more in August of what exactly is the TRS board interested in seeing related to stress testing. Todd Green from Kavanaugh and McDonald's supposed to be sharing a template with me of what they're proposing to do, and we can discuss that and decide if that's what we want to see or if we want to see other things as well in August. Any other questions? No? Okay. So like I said, overall, in spite of a scare or two, I think really the session was, ended up being successful. There wasn't anything totally off the wall that got passed. The studies that are in House Bill 715, I don't think will be too onerous. I mean, those are overarching like state budget expenditures and revenue studies with pensions being a piece of it. So we'll see how much focus we get on pensions. So can I move on then to executive summary? So a couple of staffing updates. Kim Lloyd, who is our accounting tech here at TRS, is retiring. In fact, today's her last day at TRS, and we, upon adjournment, will have some cake and refreshments for Kim. And we just, earlier this week on Monday, in fact, offered her position to Christian Ward, who is currently out front. We did advertise that position externally. We had 37 applicants. We interviewed 4 of them, and our first candidate turned the position down, but our second candidate was Christian, and I think.
And they say employment's under 4%?
Yes.
37 applicants.
We had 37 applicants, and I think
place to work,
Christian,
though. It's a good place to work.
Christian will do an excellent job for us. He's been great so far with what he's done out here, and he's got a 4-year degree, and he'll do good for us there.
Good.
So unfortunately, then that means we have to replace him in his current roles in that position.
But you have 37 applicants to pick from.
Well, no,
No.
that's a different position.
Were a number of those other state employees looking to transfer to this?
Yes. Yep, in fact, of the 4 we interviewed, including Christian, 3 of the 4 were state employees. So
It's a good sign.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
You probably
So
heard
that's-
about your new digs.
Well, not yet. That's all going to be very public very soon. I mean, it's not that it's a secret. It's been public. We've talked about it at these meetings many times, but it's going to hit the newsletter, as you'll see here shortly when Darla does her presentation. So anyway, we will have some cake and refreshments as soon as we're done with our meeting today to celebrate Kim's last day at work. And I think she's been here about 8 or 9 years. Does that sound right, Tammy?
Yeah.
About 8 or 9 years. So
Yeah.
Kim's been a good employee for us here at TRS.
She planned to retire completely, or she
Yep,
asked her?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, she's done.
Yep, she's
Yeah.
done.
Yep. So, okay, so then item number 2 is our alternative work schedule. These are our summer hours. TRS has a policy where during the summer months between essentially Memorial Day and Labor Day, we allow staff to adjust their hours. I mean, if they're a 40-hour employee, they still have to work 40 hours. But we offer some flexibility of exactly when they do that. And so basically just for your informational purposes, the summer work schedule is posted here for your review.
So for example, if they want 4 longer days too, they can take Friday off. That's
Yep.
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, they can do 4 10s or 4 9s and a 4. I mean, there's we offer some flexibility. I think I've heard Tammy talk about way back when it was sort of nice to it wasn't really your downtime of the year,
No,
but
it's-
it was to prevent some burnout just because of
Yeah.
Right, it's just a morale booster
Yeah.
because it is our busiest time of year, June, July, and August, of processing retirement apps. And of course, we've got a short window of summer here in Montana, so to try to let staff have a little bit more
You guys
flexibility.
clock in and out, or is it all?
No.
No.
We have fobs that to get in the building before 8 o'clock. But
How come you retired people still have to work 40 hours a week?
retired?
retired. That's That's retired payroll
Payroll,
staff.
Yeah. They would probably want to know the answer to that question as well.
Right. Okay, so if there's no questions there, that is all I have, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. So let's see, Denise, then we've got our legal counsel report. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not do public comment.
Oh, no, you just
Are you
moved right
sure?
along. Yes.
I
Thank you.
did
No
not do
public
public
comment
comment.
on the session?
Oh, okay.
Twist my
You know,
arm.
we did survive the session, and I hope that we'll continue to do well. There is definitely going to be, as there always is, a segment of our legislators that aren't in favor of public pensions, and that's not going to change. So I just hope we steel up and get ready to defend our pensions as well as we've done, and even better, to convince more folks that defined benefit plans are more affordable in the long run and give more security to our members. And that's just a message that has to get through, and I'm hoping that with Darla's help. And board members, I think you make a big difference also in letting business owners know and others that what TRS is doing is a very good thing for recruiting and retaining quality educators. And it's a part of what makes people stay. And so I hope we can be successful in convincing folks of that. And also, not to move any further on our working retiree. We can try to see how it goes, and hopefully not do anything more that encourages early retirement and exacerbates their recruitment and retention issue, which is getting drastic out there.
They don't want to pay. The ultimate thing, you could just pay your teachers.
Right.
Exactly, that's
That
true.
would be.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, Denise, would you like to give us a summary of what's going on?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just my quick additional update on the legislative session, because I always, during the session, am looking at not retirement-specific legislation, but other bills that might impact us on a more sort of administrative, level. And we actually had, we had a couple of them that were fairly not things we would have wanted to have dealt with that died or were tabled in committee, and recently reviewed all of the past legislation that might impact us from an administrative perspective, and there's just really nothing that's going to necessitate changing of our policies or internal practices, etc., that I could find. I will admit that there's typically one thing that takes me by surprise after every legislative session, but I think we're in good condition with the things that are not directly retirement related. At this point, the only case still pending, of course, is Edward Zabrocki. I think this is the one that will last me until retirement. Sean has the lease, I have Mr. Zabrocki. So since the last time we talked, of course, there were motions pending. The motions that Mr. Zabrocki filed to stay the execution of the agency determination and to join the school district as a party were denied by Judge Menahan. And then there were additional motions filed by Mr. Zabrocki in his, if you all recall, when you did your final determination in the Zabrocki matter, one of the things that you specifically included in that determination and appended was the hearings examiner's decision on the motion in limine regarding the constitutional issue of the interactive or the sort of joined funding and operations of Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch and the Yellowstone Academy Elementary School District. Mr. Zabrocki, as part of his petition for judicial review, included a claim for relief based on constitutional violations and a claim for relief under the declaratory judgment action. I'm sure none of you remember this, but the hearings examiner's order on the motion in limine, because it's correct under law, said that the appropriate place to get the constitutional question answered is not by an administrative agency, especially one that doesn't have oversight of the laws or subject matter that's seeking to be determined, but to request declaratory judgment in district court to get those issues resolved. Well, Mr. Zabrocki didn't go and file a declaratory judgment action directly. He included it in his petition for judicial review. And of course, my position is that that's an improper place to, if you couldn't determine it as part of the underlying cause of action, it doesn't appropriately belong in judicial review of your final decision. So, and I filed a motion to dismiss that claim. So that is pending at this point. It will be scheduled for oral arguments soon, but I guess I lay that all out to you by way of saying, you know, I expect we will still be talking about Mr. Zabrocki's petition for judicial review. Hopefully the final determination from the district court at this meeting next year, but it's progressing slowly. Other than that, we have no contested case matters underway or on the horizon that I can see, so all is well.
Okay.
I think that's it, unless there are questions. Again, if you have legal questions or that about the Zabrocki matter, again, because it could come back to you, other than updating you on the status, we don't talk about the facts or the law, because some portion of the case could come back to you on remand. So Mike Kaufman at Drake Law Firm is always available if you have questions or concerns.
We never heard back on that information request.
No.
For legal list. Okay.
No.
Thanks, Denise. All right, so let's do our communication manager's report.
Yes, I have to log in here.
Okay. Would you like us to move to?
Check, so yeah.
I forgot to bring in a hotel receipt.
Ah, sorry, we can get it from
I'll send it to you.
Sure.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the board, you've seen a draft, and as Janice already mentioned, apparently the process of taking all those documents and merging them in one PDF caused weird characters to appear in the copy you saw, but they're not really there. So, obviously the legislative update is one of the important things that we're talking about. So this is just page spread, so I'll have to scroll down quickly here. A little bit smaller. So this is the inside spread. The legislative updates are pretty short and sweet. Luckily, there wasn't a whole lot of effect on the recipients of this, which are active and retired members. Active and inactive, so anyone who's in a term vested status would get this. So because it's 4 pages, and this is what they look like when they're printed, ever since I've been in this job, I've been trying to keep the newsletters, the cost within reason. So I try to keep it to this 4-page format. Then it can be a single piece of paper folded in this size instead of 8 pages that have to be folded in half and probably cost more to tab and mail and all that. So that's why it's limited to this size. So because of that, I had to sort of triage the number of potential topics I had to cover. And I thought we had this nice testimonial from this lady from last year, but because there's been no newsletter for a while, I've been holding on to it, but it's great, so I wanted to include that. So I thought the rest of it is obviously we have to discuss the move. We talk about our new logo, so I kind of took a theme of, you know, change and customer service and just sort of feel good parts with some reminders on the back page that we always have. So keep your beneficiaries up to date, keep your addresses up to date. And then there was a lot of staff updates. I did update, the copy you see on the screen here is slightly different from the one you had. I did update that Christian is taking that position and then just that we're interviewing candidates for his. I see, we don't have any board member changes to
On my
make
TRS.
right now.
Oh, really?
This will be mailed out in either the end of this month or early June, so it'll still be within this fiscal year.
With numbers where the X's go on the bottom line?
They do that, the print and mail services does
Oh.
that. Mhm.
Okay.
Really? That's weird.
So Sean, I don't know if you wanted to talk about
Um,
anything specifically?
No, I don't. Do they add that for you, or do you,
They
they
do.
give you the number and you have to add it?
I give them the InDesign file and they just
They'll
plug it
add
in.
the number,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't. Nothing else on the newsletter other than, we were just, wanted the board to see it and just make sure you guys are good with the message that we're sending here. I think we definitely have to notify our membership that we're moving. And then otherwise, the legislative update and sort of our usual reminders. Good.
Diane did make a suggestion for the next issue that we'll talk about. I thought was a good suggestion. We'll add, her idea was to mention that we have this nice pre-retirement checklist, kind of a document that tells you what to do
Yeah.
3 years out, 2 years out. So she would like us to promote that. So I said, that definitely could go in the next one. That'd be a good time of year too in the winter for people that are thinking about retirement.
What's with the boxes where certain letters are left out?
I mentioned that before. It's just from the combination of taking all the documents and merging them into one PDF for the board packet.
Oh.
Apparently caused that because they're not there.
They're not really there.
Yeah.
Something about FI they don't like.
Yeah, I think it had just interpolated
Well, and
those letters a touch.
I optimized the packet too, so it's smaller,
Okay.
which it could be part of it too.
Okay.
'Cause I take them they're all separate PDFs, combine them into one, and
see.
then I optimize it so it reduces the size. So that could be what that.
So when you mail it out, is this a trifold that has so it doesn't need an envelope, right? You
Right.
just put the address right on it, yeah.
And if it had been, in some of the issues that have been published in the past were bigger, they were 8 pages. And that's, of course, a lot more costly and it
Yes.
can't be folded that way.
Right.
So this, I've tried to keep it to 4 pages and
Yeah.
keep the cost down. And this issue, we do have color photos. I think it would look, it wouldn't look very good if we went just black and white.
The majority of people, including me, don't have longer than a 4-page span of attention.
Yeah,
anyway.
I kind of agree with that. I
Yeah,
don't know how the rest of you feel, but I certainly think keep it short and sweet,
You hear that?
kind of light.
Don't write that down.
Yeah.
So,
No different, Joe.
Yeah.
knowing that you all were going to see this, and staff, I've also asked them to give me any corrections. So I'm looking at you, Denise.
Yeah.
By the end of
But
today.
no
so they
more
can-
than 4 pages.
Yeah. So this will go to the printer, the files for this and the photos and everything will go to the printer on Monday. They already have our mailing list that they go through and do a lot of validation. So that's a nice process, just as a side comment here. We send, the mailing list had just a few over 33,000 names and addresses in it. They go through and run USPS validation on that and send us back reports that show who's got a change, move order on file and what addresses are just undeliverable, so that we can then take those, and we have a process built now where we can take that report and suck it into our M-Trust system and update addresses or mark them as mail returned. So that-
And just to serve my memory, isn't that roughly 18,000 active and 15,000 retired? Those 33,000?
Roughly, yeah, it's
Right.
like 19 and.
19,
yeah,
14.
yeah. And, well, yeah, 13.
Give or take.
Yep.
Okay.
So one thing I wanted to throw out, especially to those of you in the school districts, is if there are we're always looking for testimonials, or I'm always looking for testimonials. If you ever hear a nice comment, give them my number and we'll talk. I think that's a nice thing to add whenever we can. I think our customer service is something we really should be promoting.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the newsletter.
19 and 15, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I thought I would also show you a few things. I'll try and keep this short. So I have sort of pages waiting. So this isn't public yet, but this is the page. Our home page will look like this. this, kind of like what you just saw in the newsletter. We'll announce the date. I have a link to contacts page. I'll show you that as well. We have a new map drawn, and I think when I've worked in this building twice before, actually, in prior positions, it's confusing to people knowing which entrance to use, so I try to make that clear. And you can't see it, but on the left side here, this wall actually says 100 North Park. I mean, it does have the address.
It's a reasonably small point, but did anybody think possibly of taking the whole staff up there, putting them out there and taking a picture with all the people? That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Maybe over there.
Yeah.
We can't.
You want to come cover the
We'd
floor
have
as
to
well?
do it, I mean, we can't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Take
good point.
everybody at once.
Okay, all right, ignore that.
Yeah, I just stopped by on my way home one night and grabbed a picture.
Yeah, it's funny that with this business, you can't, it's not like you can
Right.
decide we're gonna have a retreat and
And not
everybody
everybody's there at the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
time.
Right.
I get it.
We have lots of unscheduled walk-ins and.
Well, we could do a creative picture and take it here and then shop, yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah, Photoshop
it,
it
paste it
into,
in,
yeah.
Maybe on our first day, we should run outside to get a
Yeah,
quick
nice,
photo.
nice
I don't
picture.
know. But
Make the phones busy.
it seems like that is, from when I worked there before, that is people's confusion. So I'll jump now. I just took the existing content on this page and moved it down. So, and Sean or Tammy or somebody, they'll decide when I'll actually put this out there on our public webpage. It's not out there just yet. So the same thing will happen. Have a kind of a pending version of this page as well. So I actually put the same photo, at least temporarily here. This will be when we move, the actual day that we're in the new building. This will be live and it'll say, you know, here's where we are now, here's a map.
Perfect.
Kind of drew a little thing, you have to go up in the back. I mean, I did include instructions in here somewhere. Oh yeah, if you use the Park Avenue entrance, just take the elevator up one floor. Pretty simple, it's just it'll take a little time for people to get used to it. And then there's a link to Google Maps with that address already programmed into it, so. And then there's, also each page has this footer area, and I've already got a correction ready to go for that too, so that'll have our new address there. The board page is the only other page that has the address mentioned for where board meetings are, so I've got that one ready to go as well.
Even though this doesn't go live till you actually move, is there going to be someplace current or during June and July indicating that there is a move? If you looked it up 2 weeks before you came to town.
This page will be out there before.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, just, thinking you looked prior.
This one will go out whenever I get the go-ahead to put it out.
Pretty soon, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So this'll live out there until the
Okay.
day we move, and then,
Then you
the
should-
day or the weekend.
Okay,
probably
okay, I
of the move,
missed that, yeah.
We'll put the real homepage will also have a little blurb we've moved, and then it'll live too.
Yeah.
My 2 cents worth, don't do it until June. Because those that are retiring this year are still coming here.
Yeah.
You might freak them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's traumatic enough retiring.
Yeah.
For some people.
I
We'll
noticed-
time it, about the same time that the newsletter's gonna be going out, I would think, is when we want to put this on our page, which
Yeah.
is likely to be right
Middle
around
of
the
June.
beginning or middle of June, so.
Yeah, by middle of June, the retirees have,
Yeah.
Got her done.
When we thought we were
They
moving
better.
into June, we decided not to put it out there during the legislative session.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's pretty simple, but I just wanted you to know we are trying to really get the word out there.
Right.
And then the only other thing I will show you quickly, and this is very rough draft, not even Sean has seen this yet, but I have a start on a page that will talk about other investments, the third leg of retirement kind of topic. This, I will say, it's a tricky one because we can't really give that kind of financial advice we don't want to put ourselves in a position where it's hard for me anyway to think of how to write it in a way that's generic and talk about it. We do talk about it in our new TRS 101 presentation. We have one slide that says, oh, by the way, it's really great if you can have your TRS retirement, your Social Security, and other savings. And so anyway, I will show you quickly. You don't need to review all the words on this screen. Oh no. Let me think about this for a second. Oops, that's what I did. There we go. So again, this is nowhere near ready probably. I just talked about this, basically what TRS is. It's not the same as a defined contribution. You might have access to a deferred compensation plan. We did find out from Empower, the Empira deferred comp plan, that Chris Heisel told me only 17 districts. I asked about statewide, so I don't know if he was giving me the number that he has or all of them, but it wasn't all of the districts. So I just have this little graphic sort of illustrating this. I did have a disclaimer: we do not administer these plans. We encourage you to ask your administration about it.
You mentioned 403B in there?
Yes.
Right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And any of this can be modified. It's just
Right,
Yeah.
so we're aware and we know a lot of districts offer something, but like Darla said, not nearly as many of them offer the DC deferred comp plan that Empira offers. They can contract with Empira to offer their deferred comp plan, but they'll offer some other somebody else administers them.
Yep.
So we can't. It's hard for us we can't really get too specific about what the plan's called or how it's
Well,
portrayed.
it's only going to be deferred comp or a 403B. There will never be a 401K offered.
Right.
So I think in that paragraph where you say you may have access to a deferred comp plan, you can say or a 403B
Yep,
plan.
I can certainly add that.
Yeah.
This is it's a very draft, and it's not available to you right now to review. I'll have Sean and Tammy and Denise review it, and we'll probably add other stuff. But then we can put it out on the production server without any links to it and just provide you a link, kind of like we do with the board packets. So I also have, this page is intended to provide general guidance, not specific advice. I'm sure Denise can give me better language for that. I tried to provide some general links, just there's some good information about retirement on the AARP site. There was a good consumer reports guide, so I just sort of added these 5 links at the bottom.
Even though it's not links related, you might put in there somewhere, or your local financial planner or current financial planner.
Just put Dan and I's names in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
Okay, wait a minute.
Go to your website.
One thing I would say though, in our industry, there's a division between education and advice, and we're able to even provide education without it being considered advice, as long as it's not a specific recommendation to an individual. So you've got, I think, a little more latitude than you might think
Yeah.
there.
You got it written very generically anyway. I think you're in good shape.
I think, again, the line that I feel is tricky is how much do we want members to think they can call us with those questions, or even imply by giving a link to a company or something,
Sure.
that would seem.
Right.
I
Well,
struggled with what to put and what not to.
They probably just need to contact
That's
someone in
another-
their own district,
Yeah.
HR, to tell them what is the plan that we have.
Yep, I did have.
That's another good
Encourage you to ask
reason
your
for maybe
administration.
including another line at the bottom of the websites that she offers. For further addition, contact your local financial planner or something like
Yeah.
that. So that sort of indicates to them that we are not a resource for answers to these questions.
I don't think we reference IRAs in there or that as well, and I think, I think some,
Well, it's a good
No,
reason
it
not
was,
to.
it's in there.
is IRAs are?
Yes.
Oh, I made it quick.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, okay.
Yeah.
right there.
Oh, there you go.
Might explore other options such as opening an individual retirement account at a qualified financial institution.
That's great.
Like I said, this
Oh,
is,
good.
I completely made this up, so
Yeah.
this is very rough. I will send this on for internal review, and then I'll let you guys give us other suggestions as well, unless you have others you can think of right now.
I wonder if there should be a line in there about the fact that they can roll those 403Bs into an individual retirement account. Some way to structure that language simply and easily, because I think a lot of people don't know that when they retire. And then I don't know how limited the options are inside their 403B in terms of investment choices.
It's probably something they need to talk to a
To the
financial
financial
advisor.
advisor.
I would feel.
We have already
Uncomfortable.
too much confusion about
Yeah.
rollover rights and that related to withdrawals and
I'm
that
sure.
sort, I mean, that would just be asking
It's outside of your
For
purview. It's-
inquiries to
Yeah.
us that, yeah. We may want to add, I'm just thinking language in there to, check with your employer rather than administrator, but also, we do have a few employers who are not Social Security participants.
Right, I think
You
I
do,
put.
but there's
So
only
is that in there?
couple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not many, but
Yeah.
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 Oh, yeah.
I said
Shockingly.
most, yeah, most
Yeah.
years.
Oh, okay.
Blue sky.
Sorry, I haven't,
Oh, what are you talking about, like railroad engineers
and
that?
my eyes
Or-
are.
teachers.
Yeah.
Teachers that are not part of the social security system?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, 'cause
I
it's
did-
by employee.
Governmental
Yeah, it's
plans
by
weren't initially, so unless they have a 218 agreement, they're not
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Huh.
So, that's the 50-cent tour of that new page.
Good job.
I wanted you to know we
Great.
are
Good
trying to
job.
make progress on this, it's just been a struggle. And then, one other comment about the newsletter and the fact that we didn't do it, and it came up, of course, with Nolan's conversation as well, is last year from March to August was heavily focused on the online beneficiary designation work. And then in August to October, it was preparing new presentations for MFPE, so I will take the blame.
We-
My bandwidth, I didn't have enough bandwidth to
We
do
could put an
these.
asterisk in here that says, realize that defined benefit plans are not the same as socialism.
Probably
Contact
don't
your
wanna go there
legislator.
either. Although,
We'll wait till after the next election cycle.
So yes, if anyone ever has topics or suggestions for the newsletter, I welcome them.
good job.
So, any other questions?
That looks nice, thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd like to.
Oh,
make a
yes, go
comment
ahead, Diane.
Specific to communication. Darla has just done, along with others, a great job in trying to bring younger folks information and creating a special TRS 101 and having a great presence at our educators conference and just being responsive and getting stuff done. So we do ask a lot, just because we hear what our members say. And I just can't tell you how wonderful it's been to work with your staff and continue to improve what we're doing, I think, in terms of getting the word out. But there's a lot more to do.
There's a lot more to do.
And I will say too, because I work with the new teachers in my school, but to show there's so much out there. And so we've been using the website quickly with the new teachers. And then I just had a group of retirees that wanted some other things, and I just showed them the website.
Good.
That's all I did.
Well, and
It's like, here's
the
what you do.
website can always be improved as well, so be sure and let me know if you see something that doesn't make any sense. It's hard to keep. We're doing disabilities, right?
I think
Actually-
we're going to change a little bit of the, if it's okay with everybody, we're going to change, we're going to put long-range planning up first, so that Diane can stay, and then she can just leave and doesn't have
Thank
to
you.
come back.
I'm just gonna turn the
That's
recorder
nice,
off.
thank
Okay.
you.
I think we're on 8, which is applications and benefit adjustments
Oh, yeah,
first. And then
first.
we'll
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, members of the board, since our last board meeting, we've processed 35 retirement applications. Of course, we're about to head into our busiest time of the year for TRS, so you will see a drastic change at the August meeting as far as the number of applications that we will be processing for May, June, and July.
All right, thank you, Tammy. So we'll move long-range planning up, which is behind tab 10.
Yes, so Madam Chair, members of the board, on page 77, 78, and 79 of your packet is the long-range planning section. The actual commitment worksheet's on 78 and 79. There really isn't a whole lot of updates at all this time. Obviously, one of our big items has been just secure different workspace, and that's well underway. Construction's going on over at North Park. We have the move scheduled, and then we have the update of this building's underway as well. I don't have any bids or anything on this building yet, but those will be coming shortly, and this will get underway as soon as we can get it underway, so it's not sitting vacant for any length of time if we can help it. I think unless there's a questions about a specific item on the strategic plan, what I wanted to talk to the board about was, we're every 2 years we kind of do a more involved, more in-depth strategic planning session, and we haven't, this will be the second year coming up this year, so we're due to do that. And typically what we do is we have Jim Cairns come in and facilitate, a half a day or better of strategic planning for the board and staff. And I wanted to discuss that with the board today and see if that's something you want to pursue, or if we want to try to do it how we did it last year, where it's just self-directed by me or other staff and the board, or if we want to bring in Jim.
In the past, that was our August meeting.
Yeah.
Pure and simply, there wasn't a lot of business at all.
Yep.
I don't think there was any business. It was
Yeah.
just we called it a retreat, and we added that on so that we could do some of this. So yeah, he is helpful in facilitating the SMART goals and things like that. And that also leads to then Sean's, directors.
The appraisal and all that, yeah. Yeah. So we budgeted enough to do that. I would recommend we do, as long as everyone's good with that. I will schedule with Jim and we'll start some work ahead of the meeting and then have him facilitate on August 1st now.
Okay.
Fine. We don't need a motion or anything.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, the half day for that, and then the half day for what else we need.
And it's not much of a business meeting, is it?
No, not usually.
Yeah. Sometimes some disabilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if there's if we have something that needs to be appealed to the board in a timely manner or something, but as of right now, I don't see anything else that we would have other than maybe disability. Okay, I will work with him and get that scheduled. And
What he's good at too is he's good at kind of like taking just everybody's random thoughts, and we don't really, we may not even get anywhere, but he gets somewhere somehow, so.
Captured. Okay, well, if there are no questions about, page 78 and page 79, which is the commitment worksheet, then that's all I have on that topic, other than we will have, our meeting in August will primarily be for strategic planning.
Okay.
It's time to update that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
All right, well then, let's, Diane, thank you so much.
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming all the time.
Have a good summer.
Thank you.
We'll close the meeting so that we can review our disability applications. All right, so we need a motion on the disability request for Vicki L. Bisbee.
So moved.
Second.
To approve, I'm sorry.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Scott, were you able to vote?
I vote aye.
Okay. Right, and then also a motion for the disability request for Danny Boykin.
So moved. Oh. Yes.
A second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Seeing no public here to comment, I think we need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.